Everybody, I'd like to call to order Rules Administration and Procedures Committee meeting today. Today is Tuesday, October 17th. The time is 3:03 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Chairperson Ron Warman,
Here.
Vice Chair Emmanuel Yamas,
Here.
Alderman Edward Bug,
Here.
Alderman Carl Franco,
Here.
Alderwoman Patty Smith.
Here.
All present.
And then, I don't know if it's the time, I'd also like to acknowledge that Alderman Schwedabate is in the room and Alderman Ted Masiacos is in the room as well. So, first item on the agenda is approval of minutes.
So moved.
23-0802, approval of the minutes from Rules Administration and Procedures Committee held on October 3rd, 2023. Motion by Alderman Smith, second by Alderman Bug. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, anybody here for a public comment?
No, we do not.
Okay. We're going to change the agenda up here a little bit. Alderman Masiacos had asked about if he could move his items up in the order, and so we're gladly going to accommodate that. So first item is 23-0416, a resolution approving the Investor Aurora and Ward 3 Facade and Site Improvement Grant Program. Alderman Masiacos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my colleagues on City Council here this afternoon. This is just a continuation of a program we already have, basically for the Third Ward. Expired with the last program duration expired with the last term, and looking to continue this program. What we're doing different a little bit this time is just lowering the amount of the eligibility for business to participate in this, and also with insight and also advice from Investor Aurora, who helps oversee this program for the Third Ward.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
Yeah, quick question, Alderman Masiacos. Would you just give us a quick overall brief description of what this is?
Sure. I'll pretty much just go off some of this this cover memorandum. So it's a program that helps businesses in the Third Ward to reimburse 50% of total rehabilitation costs for exterior improvements on the building, but not to exceed $25,000 in grant funds. But also allow, and I said that with the changes, to allow minimum of overall project cost to be $5,000. We lowered that in this proposal. So it will be on a first come, first served basis. We did have one person or one entity that submitted last year for the full $25,000 and was granted the $25,000 from Investor Aurora, was approved. But like I said, some comments from the business owners with this program was that it takes a lot in this economy to come up with a large amount and do a big project. And we have a lot of small businesses in our ward predominantly, some mom and pop type businesses as well. And trying to get through and survive and get back on their feet after COVID, smaller amounts seem to make sense at this point in helping them out.
Motion to approve.
Any other questions, comments? Alderman Yamas?
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a question. If you could clarify on the memo, it mentions that this is for residents, but you mentioned businesses a few times. Is it for businesses and residents, or residences, or is it one or the other?
Did I say residents?
No, you kept saying businesses, but
This is
memo
a
says
Ward
residents.
3 Facade and Site Improvement Grant Program, right? It's a 2-year grant program, item 23-0416.
And then under the discussion, it says eligible homeowners include Third Ward residents, but then right now during your comments, you've mentioned businesses and small business owners.
Where is it exactly? If you could help me out.
The page 1 of the memo where it says the discussion.
Which article? Discussion.
The current one, we're on the 23-0416.
Or am I looking at the? Oh, I got ahead of myself. I'm looking at the next one, the
The next
50,000 one. That was my fault. Okay, no wonder I was confused. Okay, I'll save those questions for the next one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Glad
no
that worked out. Okay.
Yeah.
So
It
to
was clarified.
clarify,
Thank
are
you.
we talking homes or now that you've,
So homes is the next one,
Okay.
the next item.
this is This is businesses. that we-
Yeah.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct,
Thank
correct,
you.
right.
Thank you. Stop
Okay.
making things complicated
Chairman.
there, Alderman.
Alderman Bug?
Thank you. Alderman Basiakos, I just wanted to ask you, and this is something I'm going to bring up later on when we talk about changing some of our aldermanic initiatives. And you use an administrator, so it's a little bit different for you than some of the other aldermen. But when you use the Neighbor Project and Invest Aurora, do they have a requirement, or do you have a requirement that they have to get at least one bid from an Aurora vendor? I know the Neighbor Project sometimes has different requirements, but I don't know if that attached to this program.
One thing that I do know right off the top of my head is, that, we promote prevailing wage with this project.
I appreciate that.
And there is a checklist. I don't have it with me right now that goes through Invest Aurora in regards to the bids. I don't think it's just one bid and done. I believe they do have to provide at least two, if not three, unless I'm way off. I'd be hesitant if it was just one bid and,
Sure. Yeah, and not just one bid, and something I'm going to suggest for our grant programs is that we at least, and kind of in line with what the city is trying to do, to give a little bit of preferential treatment to our rural businesses, that when we're doing these types of programs, we at least get one bid from an Aurora vendor. We have so many different vendors in the city, and a lot of times, unfortunately, the first bid comes in maybe from one of our neighboring towns. The Aurora, businesses don't know about it or don't get the opportunity, and it goes forward. So that's something that maybe we could look into. I mean, like I said, Neighbor Project may have.
Well, this is not through the NAPER project. This is the business one. This is through
Okay,
Invest
okay.
Aurora.
Okay, Invest Aurora, okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they have some type of requirement. I believe they don't. But I believe that's something that we should really consider.
Yeah, you got me a little off guard with that. It's a program that we've already approved in the city, so the main challenge here, or main change we had here was in regards to lowering the overall project cost requirement. Be more than happy to get back to you with that.
Okay.
Motion to approve.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Alderman Franco?
Real quick. So I see under the discussion, it says the grant reimburses 50% of the total rehabilitation costs, but not to exceed 25,000 in grant funds. Is that cap per project or per year for anybody?
The subject line item talks about $75,000 per year. $25,000 in grant funds is per project.
Per project? Okay.
Right.
Okay. I was just, because I know, like, in mine, I have 25,000 per year. So, and I thought that's what you were doing with this, because I was gonna say, if it's 25 per year, you don't need 75,000, obviously, you only need 50, but, okay, that makes
Sure.
sense.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments? A motion by Alderman Smith. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Franco. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Next item, 23-0512, a resolution authorizing a 2-year grant program in the amount of $50,000 per year in partnership with Rebuild Aurora and the Neighbor Project to assist qualified residents with projects in the 3rd Ward. Alderman Masiaco.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Another resolution we're looking to extend. It took a while to come up with this program and the other one as well, because we want to get some solid feedback from our participants in this program. RTA and the Neighbor Project as well. So the main change here with this is not the amounts per se that's allocated per year, but more so in regards to what we're looking to also provide supplementary funding for. And that is for, here we go, here was the verbiage. One of the items that RTA and the Neighbor Project both agreed upon was there are urgent and sometimes repairs that are deemed urgent that cost a little bit more than necessary. So We're looking to, because in projects categorized as an emergency, as it says here, due to high need, urgent health, and/or safety concerns will be considered for up to an additional $15,000. Based on their experience and based on what we've been seeing over the past 4 to 6 years we've had this program running. And then also on top of it, the neighbor project, even though we always had historic district type homes out of the equation, there are some things that might not be eligible through the historic grant for homes, like on the inside of the house. So looking to include some of those types of projects on the list of things that can be taken care of.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Yes, I have a question.
Alderman Smith?
So this is a pretty awesome program that you have, Alderman Masiacos, but I do have a question about the funding, just a curious question. It says that it's a $50,000 per year in partnership, so you're doing it with the neighbor project and the RTA. How much comes from your budget?
It's a 50-50, not to exceed.
Not to exceed, so you pay for half of the project?
Yes,
And they pay
yes.
for the other half?
Right.
Okay. And then,
Well, it adds up. No, if they'll do their maximum, and then the project will add another that much more to it. They can't spend more than $4,999 if, for example, if CDBG funds to help out a home. And that's where we came in with this program a few years ago through discussions about how to help some of our neighbors and some of the people in the third ward and say, okay, we'll match dollar for dollar what you're doing with the neighbor project or with RTA. And it's first come, first served basis between the two organizations. And it's been incrementally going up every year in terms of utilization of these dollars between the two organizations.
and that was my next question. Are you finding that you're using your maximum amount each?
Not yet, but it's going up every year slightly. And I think I've talked about it in my alderman's corner, probably not my last one. I think I talked about it, and it showed a graph how it's gone up. I don't have the exact numbers here today, but I can get those for you too as well.
Nicely done.
Alderman Yamas, excuse me.
Thank you. First, I want to apologize for the last item where I confused the two. I'm sure I confused other people by my own confusion. But with respect now to this item, this is, it's like Alderwoman Smith asked, this is up to $50,000 per year. And I thought your other ward program was up to $75,000 per year.
Yes.
So that's $125,000, which is more than our annual budget for each alderman. So do you prioritize one program over the other, or is it still just first come, first served for both programs? Out of
No,
the
there's money in
75?
ward funds for both these programs over the next 2 years.
I'm sorry, say that again?
There's money in the ward funds for the next 2 years.
So from your, kind of I don't know.
Not mine, but the
reserves?
ward funds.
Well, from the ward reserves then, not from the annual budgets?
No, there's no way to handle it in the annual budget. Annual budget is $50,000.
That's why I'm asking, because these amounts are over.
Ward
that.
funds are there. I don't know, I hope they're there. I don't know if, nobody's here from the Treasury Department here, so I don't think Mr. Minnick, we could ask him. I mean, the numbers say they're there.
Okay.
So,
If
and
the
that's why we
money's
get
there, it's there then.
approval. It's been reviewed by, I think, the mayor's staff and also our legal counsel as well. So we have the money. We've been squirreling it away over the last 10, 11 years, so,
All right, thank you.
yeah.
I just think that this is a great example of, as we move to our next section, of why it's important to have additional ward funds for situations like this that come up in your ward that you may not have known about 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I think this is a wonderful thing for you to be doing with your community.
Well, we have a lot of older stock homes. We're the southeast side of Aurora, and you don't have too many newer developments besides Hometown and Chatham Grove. I mean, and now some of the newer parts that we took over crossing Ogden Avenue, but the grand majority of it is older stock. And residents are having a harder time trying to make ends meet with escalation of costs, especially now with COVID, that the higher increase in construction materials has really made it more challenging for people. And unfortunately, not everybody has, like when my dad lived next door to me, not everybody had their son or their daughter next door helping them out, covering their costs, helping them out whenever they could. So trying to help out the seniors that are still there and still trying to hang on a limited budget, on a fixed income. And it's become very popular. And we've seen it incrementally as it goes up. And working with these organizations, especially the RTA, some of these projects that are approved, they get the labor for free, so we're just paying for materials as well. So sort of a win-win for the residents to some degree with this project. I appreciate your support.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any other questions, comments? Motion by Alderman Smith, second by Alderman Bug. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alderman. Next item on the agenda is 22-0211, an ordinance creating Section 2-65 of the Code of Ordinances pertaining to aldermanic initiative funds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rick Veenstra, Corporation Counsel. Today I'm going to present on Proposal 22-0211, which would create Section 2-65 of the Code of Ordinance pertaining to aldermanic initiative funds. There we go. Okay. Providing a little bit of background and history as to what appears to be a very unique tradition that Aurora has adopted over time. The Hollywood Casino first came to town in 1993, and at that point, the city became the recipient of gaming taxes for the first time. During the time that happened, the city council considered whether or not it made sense to look at whether those gaming funds presented a opportunity to provide the then 8 city aldermen with some proceeds of that fund in order to support ward-specific projects. In budget years 1998 and 1999, the 8 wards received $400,000 and $200,000 respectively, and that was based on a per ward allocation. There were not separate funds that were set up at that point by the finance department, although some of the records that still exist that describe what occurred at that point indicate that many of the aldermen were not able to spend anywhere near that allotment. Beginning in 2000, the city created special ward project funds for each ward and created a separate in its annual budget for accounting purposes. So that's where we really started to see the accounting side kind of really click in with respect to these ward project funds. At that point, shortly after 2000, and with the census, the city council increased in size to 10 wards, so there became 10 ward aldermen, each with a ward fund. A few years later, in 2006, city council recognized that the aldermen at large also provided, also needed and could have some opportunities to make expenditures that were akin to ward funds, but perhaps used on a citywide basis, allocated a pool of $40,000 for both of the aldermen at large to draw from. 2009, city council looked at $75,000 for each ward alderperson's project fund, and provided that 2/3 of these ward funds must be used for capital improvement projects. Now, when these ward funds first became available to the aldermen, they were designed for infrastructure projects, the effectively brick and mortar projects. Over time, really in the first decade of the century, is where you started to see an evolution for it to be softer costs, programming, and other quality of life concerns that are very much a part of every ward's existence, but every ward is a little bit differently, and these weren't quite effectively, these were not brick and mortar type projects. They became things along the lines of grants, special programming, ward cleanup type things. So it wasn't necessarily the types of facade improvement programs that you saw Alderman Masiacos presenting. They became a little bit separated from that original, the original intent of using those funds for capital purposes. So what the city council did at that point was looking, essentially saying, you got $75,000, $50,000 should be used for brick and mortar type projects, and $50,000 can be used for other purposes that were not capital improvement projects. In 2015, the Office Committee, which was comprised of the chairs of the then 4 standing committees of the City Council, took a look at how the aldermen were spending some of these funds and some of the purposes for which expenditures were being made. And they took a look at the 2009 resolution, which was only designed to apply for fiscal year 2010. And they basically drafted a policy which has been given substantial deference over the years, which outlined the types of purposes for which aldermanic funds could be used and which they could not be. Again, not an official act of the city council by any means, but has been essentially the policy document that staff has used in determining when an alderman says, I'd like to spend money for these purposes, whether that is a purpose that would be authorized or the city council intended. It's not an exact science, but it's really the best we could do given the framework that we have. Some of the shortfalls of the existing program. City Council really has never formally adopted policies describing how and when aldermanic funds can be used. This again goes back to the office policy. The office committee was effectively a loose association of those four very senior alder persons who exercised at least some informal authority and informal influence on some of those decisions, and that's how we got to the framework that we use right now. Frankly, under Illinois law, individual aldermen are legislators. They do not possess inherent executive authority or the ability to spend funds individually. There has to be a source of that authority, and that source can only come from an act of the city council because it's not available from state law. And without a direct ordinance on that, as to that effect, staff has essentially been treating the request over the years effectively in accordance with that informal policy. And also in the way that we do this, because each alderperson has one fund, it's very difficult to monitor the 2/3, 1/3 rule to the extent that it's a rule. So it becomes very difficult to know, is an alderman spending $50,000 on capital projects or $25,000 on non-capital projects? What's the ratio? And depending on what time of year it is, it can be very hard for the finance department to follow to see whether or not the 2015 policy is more or less consistently being followed. So with that, staff has prepared a proposed ordinance which attempts to codify as much as possible the existing traditions and practices which have been followed here for the better part of the last 25 years. We hope that it provides a framework for the processing of these disbursements, including providing deadlines for the submission of requests and trying to have effectively a one rule that applies to all the alderpersons. We'd like to have a mechanism where the most common types of non-capital expenditures are pre-cleared, where no other additional layers of approval by this committee or anybody else are required. Something along the lines of what you just saw with Alderman Masiakos' request for his facade improvement. That's not something that's specifically called out in the ordinance, but the ordinance provides that the RAP committee can do just as it's done now, take a look at a proposed project that's not expressly spelled out and determine whether or not it makes sense and is an appropriate use of public funds. That's the out-of-the-box non-capital expenditures. And we also looked at incorporating additional statutory as well as ordinance-based limitations with respect to the administration of the program. For example, we looked at the ethics ordinance. We took a look at the laws governing the use of political campaign funds to take a look at what sorts of limitations seem to make sense in terms of here are the bright line rules in terms of what you can and what you cannot use ward funds from a practical perspective. We provide for two different types of initiative funding. We have the capital funds, which would be would be one number divided 10 different ways for each of the alderpersons who are elected by ward, and it focuses on infrastructure and capital projects only. Non-capital is evenly split amongst all alderpersons, so all 12 alderpersons would receive non-capital funds, and they have greater discretion as to how those funds are going to be allocated. Now, in each of those cases, there must be a public purpose associated with the expenditure of these funds, which is a requirement of the expenditures of all public funds. And though these monies come from the gaming tax funds, they are still taxpayer dollars. They are administered by the city, and they need to be accounted for and spent in accordance with the same policies that any other monies by the city are spent. Some of the restrictions we took a look at doing were we tried to enumerate purposes for easy dispersal of the non-capital funds, so to reduce the red tape and make the processing as easy as possible. Again, as we discussed a few minutes ago, RAP gets to take a look at and oversee and authorizing out-of-the-box type uses. And again, the limitations on and restrictions are in line with Illinois law, the Illinois Constitution with respect to the public purpose language, and the city's ethics ordinance. We tried to also provide for operational clarity, having clear procedures as far as disbursement requests. We wouldn't have a situation where a particular alderperson may at a last minute go directly to the finance department and ask if a check could be cut at the last minute for a program when that could have been handled many, many weeks earlier. Providing clarity and purpose procedures for carryover and transfer rules. Ordinarily, when a city council budgets funds, those funds are intended to be spent within a particular year. So in those times where it makes sense to carry over funds from one year to the next, we want to encourage the alderpersons to have specific purposes. Perhaps it's going to take several years of budgeting to pay for that sound wall or for a particular program, but identifying that those funds are going to be held over for those particular purposes as opposed to just a general idea what we may like to do with it at some point in the future. Also providing for clear transfer rules. If, for example, you have non-capital funds available and you want to use those for capital funds, we want that to be something that's relatively easy for the alderman to do. If it's the other way around, where these are funds that are appropriated for capital purposes, the request is to go to the finance committee and process a budget transfer, so there's at least some ability for the finance committee to take a look at it and say these funds which were appropriated for specific brick and mortar projects may need to go for other purposes and have a mechanism to do that. And then also to apply the city's purchasing ordinance for procurements with initiative funds. Now, Alderman Bug mentioned whether or not it would be possible to include local preference or something along those lines with some of the expenditures, and that's certainly something we could take a look at to make sure that in addition to getting the lowest price possible and conserving those funds as much as possible, we also give the local vendors the opportunity to participate in that selection. We would look at having greater clarity and transparency for the aldermanic funding program, flexibility for the alderpersons and ward allocations. It also will reduce significantly what sometimes feels like an ad hoc request where we have to take a look at something and say, okay, does this fit or does this fit, and make a recommendation. Sometimes there may be inconsistent decisions as far as, I talked to this staff person says it was okay, but the law department is raising flags, or something along those lines where there's a bright line and we reduce the discretion to the greatest amount possible and make it as automatic as possible. We don't want to create a situation where Alderman A says, I want to do something, and staff says, this is not consistent, and then they can point to an example where Alderman B was able to do something very similar, but staff wasn't asked. So in order to make sure that there's consistency and that all aldermen are treated the same and fairly, that's another purpose of why we're looking at doing this. Let's see. So where does that leave us at this point? Ordinarily, when we bring an ordinance to the RAP committee, our request is please take a look at it and make a recommendation for the next COW meeting, and we'll move on from there. That's not really what our request is right now. We want you to deliberate on this. This is a aldermanic expenditure ordinance. This deals with what the aldermen do, what the aldermen would like to do, and how they'd like the program to work. And it's very important, I think, that the aldermen make the decisions as far as how this plays in. Now, surely that happens with every ordinance, but in this particular instance, this is something that I think the 12 aldermen really need to kind of work together on and make sure that it's something that works for everybody. You may want to consider making some changes to the draft. One of the things that occurred to me after I submitted the draft is whether or not it makes sense that RAP committee is effectively the decider as to the interpretation of the ordinance, rather than putting staff in a position of saying, well, we think it means this, but there's an argument that it could mean something else, letting RAP decide what that ruling is. Consider possible revisions or areas of improvement. We think that we've put together a great ordinance, but there's always something that we missed. We're not the ones who deal with the community and deal with the constituents and interact with them in quite the same way that you do. We can kind of take a look at what makes sense from a staff purpose, but you on the ground may look at it and say, I understand why this makes sense from an administration perspective. Here's why it doesn't work practically. And potentially improve the ordinance that way. You may want to look at, for example, consider whether additional non-capital items should be considered as presumptively appropriate that wouldn't require additional RAP review. You may look at it and say, well, maybe we're being a little too loose on some of these things. Maybe we should bring some more of these approval processes to RAP and have a more interactive, transparent process. You may want to also consider that some of these rules might be too strict. Some of them may be too lax. So there's a couple different ways you can approach this. And again, I think this is something that the committee, as well as your fellow aldermen who aren't on the committee, should really kind of look at, discuss, deliberate, and come together hopefully with a product that represents everybody's work and input.
Thank you.
I'm happy
Thank
to
you.
start.
With that being said, like he said, this is just a discussion as of now, and looking for feedback, and so I don't expect anything to pass today, so let's all be cognizant of, I'll call on people to talk. We're not going to talk over each other, so let's just stay organized and be professional. So with that being said, Alderman Smith.
So I'll go ahead and start. Thank you. I know the legal department's put a lot of time and effort into it. I do not disagree about needing this. I do believe that this is a very overdue guideline that we need in our alderman's office. But I also believe that as we go forward in this process, we also need to remember how diverse our city is and what the different parts of our cities look like, that each and every ward is different, and the needs in each and every ward is different. Just like Alderman Masiako's talking today about how old some of the homes are in his ward, I'm in a ward where things are newer. So I'm not at that point yet where I need to be upgrading property in my ward, or perhaps playgrounds in my ward. And I'm just using myself as an example because that's what I know. So I think when we go through this, what I do need in my ward specifically is things like signage, things like grant money to make beautification changes and safety issues for beautification and cleanup. So as we go through this capital, non-capital portion of this, I don't know if we can include and I'm going to use this word, and it's not really a word, a sub-capital. I know that we've had a lot of discussion, and perhaps for a situation like I just bought 4 signs, permanent radar signs. I don't know. Are they going to fall under infrastructure or non-infrastructure? It's signage. So if that's the case, that took, my entire non-capital budget just to buy that. But that's the need for my ward. So I'm out there. I'm the elected official. I'm not a legislator. Never said I was. But I'm the elected official that's making the decisions on what my ward needs based on the problems in my ward. So I believe that this is a wonderful thing, and I believe we do need these guidelines, but I think we do need to be very careful in how controlling we get and how strict we get on this. I am all about going through this. I do believe this needs time, and that we need to go through it with a great deal of clarity amongst us before we move it forward, because if I was to read this and then listen to you, they don't jive to me. There's not so much clarity in this document as what you just said, and I think we need to make sure that this is a clear ordinance and a clear document. I love it. I love that we're doing this, and I believe it's needed, but we also need to make sure that we remember we have a very, very, very diverse city, which needs to be reflected in this ordinance.
And I think the diversity of the city was the rationale behind the ward funding in the first place. It was designed because different wards had different needs, and we want to make sure that we respect that tradition. Now, with respect to the concept of capital versus sub-capital, not being an accountant, it may be best to speak with the finance department and take a look at perhaps if the members of the RAP committee wanted to submit is this capital, is this not capital type Q&A to the law department, we could speak with the finance department and determine whether or not there would be a basis to treat it as capital, or whether there's potentially a better term that we could use other than capital, non-capital. That's certainly been the nomenclature that's been applied over the years, but the goal, I think, was to maintain a separation between things of a more permanent or infrastructure-ish quality, and signs, I think, could, to some extent, contribute to that, versus things which are more of a one-off, here's an event, here's a grant, here's a programming type, something that has a little bit more permanency. So there may be different ways of describing that, or we could potentially increase not necessarily the size of the bucket, but the scope of the bucket.
And I'll say one more thing and then I'll heal, because I know everybody needs the opportunity. And I think as we go through this process, grants are very, even the way our grants are done in our wards are very different. You know, I just did a grant that was a huge safety issue. I helped, I collaborated with a couple different entities, the Park District and an HOA, and I gave a grant so that they could clear out an area to make it safe for pedestrians, to make it safe for people across our city, not just in those, in that HOA area. So I look at that as being infrastructure, because that's something where we moved ground and we were, but I think under the definition of infrastructure, it doesn't fall. And that's where I get concerned about this capital and non-capital, because if I look at the definition of capital, that grant, which is a need for my ward,
Sure.
would not fall under capital.
Okay.
And I will heal. That's my opinion for now.
Alderman Franco?
So I have a couple questions. You first stated that when this thing was originated, the wording must be used, must. And then something changed where it should be used. Where are we at with that right now?
Well, the difficulty is we don't have a lot in the way of a bright line as far as the way this began. We don't have anything where I can point to an ordinance or something in the city code. And that's been a big part of the trouble. From what we understand historically is that the intent of the program was for capital brick and mortar type things. And then at some point, and we're not sure with what legislative endorsement, there was a transition to things that didn't fall exactly into that category. And we've been trying to track down exactly when that might have happened and under what circumstances. It's a very difficult archaeological project, if you will. I know Stacy Peterson has been very helpful trying to find what information she has. In the legislative packet, there's a memo dating back to 2000 that kind of talks a little bit about the program. That's the earliest document I think I've seen so far. I asked her to take a look at some of the fund expenditures to try and see when there were things that were spent that didn't seem like they were capital-ish. Again, for lack of a better way of putting it. She did provide me with a breakdown of the then Ward 1 alderperson's expenditures, and they all seem to be in the capital category as opposed to other types of grants that were, again, for one-off or to support a particular mission of a nonprofit, for example, as opposed to even what Alderman Smith described as a collaboration between an HOA and others to provide for a safer passage and sidewalk.
Okay, so, thank you. So, going forward, this is how I think we should look at this. I think it's based on reality. We have historical data now, how these wards spend their money. We know. So, for example, in my ward, I think some of these things are very common to other wards. I got a $25,000 grant program. If we'll talk about it in buckets, 1/3 versus 2/3 buckets. All right, my non-capital bucket is full of that. Not to mention a cleanup day that costs $7,500. Not to mention a newsletter that costs $45, and a shred event, and the mailings. So that $25,000 is way gone. So when we look at this, I think we need to have reality say, if historically these wards spend money to keep their wards running, not for donations, charitable, nonprofits, all that kind of stuff, parties and stuff like that, to allow them to partake in that, maybe from the 1/3 bucket, we should take some of this stuff and move it into the capital and, again, rename it for somehow to do that, to free this up. Because if we're going to abide by this, and I think we should, then give us the flexibility to spend other money. So I think I would like us to be able to do that, because that's the reality. I think a lot of people have grant programs and cleanup days and shred events and newsletters. So I don't think it's just a fifth ward thing. I think a lot of people are doing it, maybe doing it more. So how do we get to that point where we're allowed to spend it? And I think going forward, that's what I'd like to see with this, is to use a common sense approach. What do we really do? And make it reasonable, so we don't have to go to finance and we have to get special permission, because you already threw it over. That's kind of what I would like to see when we do this.
Well, keep in mind that the 2/3, 1/3 rule would be rule in air quotes, because that was a guideline that was set up in 2009 for the 2010 budget, and then the office committee kind of took it and ran with it in 2015, and it's been the guideline ever since. The way this ordinance, to put it in its most simplified form, there is one pot of money that is divided 10 ways, and there is one that is divided 12 ways. Now, the Finance Committee, through the budgeting process, decides how much money to put in either of those buckets. So, to whatever extent it makes sense to have a allocation for a ward alderman vis-a-vis an allocation for an alderperson elected at large, trying to figure out what the distinction is. The easiest distinction that seems to be, that you would make, is the ward improvement type activities that only a ward alderman would necessarily focus on as their primary focus, because that is the unit which elected them most directly. And then the aldermen who are elected citywide would have, certainly they could contribute to assist, because they're every bit the constituents in Ward A are every bit the constituents of both alderpersons at large. They may want to contribute to that. But they may also have citywide projects that they may want to support as well. So it really kind of is, does it make sense to have two buckets, and how large are those buckets going to be, and what can be used, what do we want to say is the purpose of one bucket, and what is the purpose of the other bucket? What we've tried to do is take what the existing procedure is, translate that as best we can, given the information that we have, and that's what's before you. That's step one. Step two then is saying, okay, do we need to follow this model? Does it make sense to have anything where you've got the segregated funds? Does it make sense to put everything together and not worry about that boundary? That's something that the city council can decide. It's just in this ordinance, because it most closely resembles what we have now, cleaned up a little bit for accounting purposes and for transparency.
Well, and then I would think that my colleagues here would have to decide if the fundamental principle of the 1/3, 2/3 is something we want to base this on, good or bad. I always thought it was pretty good. You can massage it a little bit. And then I think once we get there, then what do we do with this? So I think that's we got to go foundation first, and then we can figure out how we go on that, I would think, going forward.
And right now, all this ordinance does is separate the two. It doesn't tell you whether one fund is half of the other fund, because that's determined through the budgeting process. So it's very possible you adopt this ordinance, and the city council, as part of the budgeting process, funds both buckets in the same amount, so that alderman has $50,000 for one purpose, $50,000 for another purpose. That's something that can be done through the budgeting process and wouldn't affect this ordinance. That's what we kind of designed it for, to allow each subsequent city council to determine how much to put.
That's all I have for now. I just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment? I have a comment if nobody else is.
I'll jump in.
Sure, Alderman Bug.
Thank you. I very much agree with Alderman Franco. Basically, we have to start with where we're at. One of the large discussions we had is that, a number of our funds are, of course, larger than just, you getting $75,000 this year and spending it. So we have to account for the, call them excess funds that some of us have. And so I think, and what Alderman Franco said, that the concept of 2/3, 1/3, I think it has worked for most of us in the past. And I think it, going forward, I think it's kind of a good guideline, at least, to start. And helping us to spend our funds, for our wards. I'm going to talk briefly about something specific because it only impacts a couple of us. Of course, there is the discussion in here about the scholarships. And I of course, do a scholarship program. Alderman Garza does a scholarship program. I don't believe anybody else does. And I talked to Alderman Warman, Chair Warman, a little bit about this. And it's, I think, at least for my portion, and probably maybe Alderman Garza also, it's important to understand where it came from, and this will impact Alderman Smith. So I printed this out because when I became an alderman, I didn't know these things, and trying to help out some of the students in my area. So the main entity that does the processing of scholarships in our region is the Community Foundation of Fox River Valley. They administer about 80% of all different scholarships that come through. It's not just Aurora, it's through the region. Most of our nonprofits that have them administer that, they have to set up who is going to be eligible for these things. A lot of them use the Dunham Fund, because the Dunham Fund is associated with a lot of the nonprofits. They use their service area. So many years ago, I went and looked at the Dunham Fund service area. And I printed this out for each of you, just so you could take a look. And this is what I learned. The Dunham Fund service area, of course, the Dunham Fund was set up in about 1998. 1998, unfortunately, is before my ward existed. So the cutoff boundary for the Dunham Fund service area is Ogden Avenue. And if you look at the map there, below Ogden Avenue is Harbor Springs, Lakewood Valley, and going south, that's Ward 9. So what I found out, that most of the students in my area, when they went to apply for these things, they weren't eligible. They thought they were because they lived in Aurora. But like I said, a lot of these organizations use the Dunham Fund service area as that kind of map. What I also learned after that, other organizations use that you have to go to a high school in Aurora. Well, guess what? 95% of my area goes to a high school in Oswego, not in Aurora. So what I learned very quickly is that the students in my area were cut off from a lot of the majority of these funds, and it was disturbing. The kids are like, I want to apply for scholarship. Now, you live in Aurora, but the way it's set up, you don't qualify. Then they went over to Oswego, and their rules were, got to be a resident of Oswego. So they really got cut out. And that's kind of was the beginning of setting up this fund. And it wasn't just, ward funds. It's not ward funds. We do a lot of, quote unquote, fundraising. The businesses have been fantastic in supporting and lending, donating money toward the scholarships for the kids. So that's, kind of where it started from and why we're here. And Alderman Warman and I talked about, they're, East Aurora, they have a great foundation. They do great things with their scholarships. Of course, you got to be in East Aurora and other parts of town. But it's just like Alderman Smith said, each section of town, each ward, you have your little intricacies. And as you become alderman, you learn what those things are. And that's kind of where we're at with that and the discussions we'll have about scholarships. Like I said, Alderman Garza is a little bit different. She works with the businesses also to do that. Definitely need rules. I know some things came up with family members and things like that. Definitely that has to be there. I already told my daughter, you don't qualify, so don't even apply. Don't even. We do it by code, so we don't know the kids' names, but it's like you're a family member, you don't qualify whatsoever. So those things need to be there. It's just ethical safeguards, and we'll have further discussions about the scholarships. But that's kind of where we were at, and all,
I was not aware of this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just add this as a side note, I went to the Dunham Fund a long time ago to see if they could change their service area, and by bylaws, they cannot. It is set in perpetuity forever. It's set, so.
No, and Alderman Bug, I think the way the ordinance is currently drafted, it prohibits essentially an alderperson from being in a position where somebody comes to them saying, I'm a student in your ward, I'd like to apply to you for a scholarship, and then the alderperson unilaterally makes the decision to award a scholarship within that ward purely with city funds. And the genesis for the prohibition actually comes out of the election code in Article 9, where it talks about the prohibited uses of campaign funds. And obviously, these are not campaign funds, but again, looking at what are reasonable restrictions. And the language in the election code is using the funds directly for an individual's tuition or other educational expenses. So what the suggestion would be, and as it's drafted in there right now, and we can certainly look at improving the language, is that an alderman can contribute to a entity that is offering those scholarships to residents of Aurora, residents of their wards. It's just a matter of Rick Veenstra applies to Alderman Bug for a scholarship. Alderman Bug can't say, okay, Rick, here's your scholarship for X amount of dollars. And that's the type of thing that we were looking at. Not that that happens, but that's the type of prohibition that we were specifically targeting and making sure that that never becomes a temptation for anyone now or in the future.
And that makes more sense to me, and I appreciate you pointing that out too, because I was unaware of how you guys were cut out basically of doing that. So I'm going to make one point here too, and I don't mean to steal your thunder, but I've been on the council a year and a half or 2 years, whatever it is. I recall we passed something to where department heads can spend up to $50,000 without any kind of council approval or anything. Is that?
That is, yes.
So then the more I thought about this is like, I mean, they literally can do something for $49,999 without a question, correct?
Well, there would ultimately be accountability if it was a inappropriate expenditure, but yes, you have vested department heads
Yeah.
who have been confirmed by the city council with that authority.
So, and again, I just throwing that out there is what's the difference between, I mean, us being allowed to do something like that versus, and again, I know they can't, buy a trip to Florida or something like that, but, they can hire a consultant, they can do this, they can do that, again, without question. So as long as, I mean.
Well, part of it is they're still obligated to adhere to the requirements of the procurement ordinance. So if Ken Schroth wanted to go out and engage a construction company to do something, and it was $30,000, it's in his authority to authorize a contract to a construction company in the amount of $30,000. It still has to go through the competitive bidding process and all that type of vetting. Same thing even with something that was below $5,000. You'd still be required to get 3 quotes before going ahead and doing it, and it reflects what the city council has appropriated for those purposes and, within the budgetary controls. So that's how it works on a department head level. Whatever level the city council felt was appropriate to have an individual alderman spending. Now, again, one of the things to consider is that a department head or somebody in the executive branch is in a position to, as part of the executive responsibility, to spend and purchase items. Typically speaking, an individual alderman in municipal government doesn't ordinarily have that type of authority inherently. So it's a matter of trying to develop what sort of parameters for this authority, which again is not found in the code, but what it might look like. I believe we've said $3,000 for entertainers, but not necessarily for anything else, for entertainers or speakers or something like that, honoraria. But for other purposes, I don't remember us putting a cap in there. I think it was a very limited purpose on that.
So they would still, like somebody in, what we have today, HR law, for instance, you couldn't, what process would you have to follow if you wanted to do, a $49,000 procurement for something? I mean, is there a three bidding process?
Well, when, for example, we purchased a copier for the law department,
Yeah.
we had to go out and get multiple quotes. We took a look at whether or not we could find a used copier that would provide the same level of quality, and, we weren't certainly buying something on the cheap on the front end that we'd be paying for on the long end, have to go through that same vetting process. Same thing for furniture. But once that particular widget or item was done, it was done. Now, if it was something that required competitive bidding, purchasing would do the competitive bidding process and then is authorized to the department is then authorized to award to the lowest responsible bidder. So as long as the process is followed, it can be up to $50,000 for a department head. And as I believe we've drafted the ordinance, if the same thing would apply if you had a $60,000 capital expenditure, no further council approval would be necessary. So with the few limitations which are set forth in the ordinance that would require additional RAP approval, you have pretty much pretty open authority in terms of spending those funds, even if they exceed $3,000 at least. Let me switch back and double check on that, but that is my recollection on how we drafted it. Yeah, if it's specifically enumerated in paragraph 2, you don't require any additional authority. The only thing that requires further approval is for honoraria, speaker fees, lodging, travel, or entertainment expenses in an aggregate amount exceeding $3,000 for any individual program or activity already authorized by the ordinance. So while there is a $3,000 limit, it only applies to a very select few things.
And then I think some of the initial confusion with this, and then thank you for clarifying that. Like the approval process, I think some folks are worried about having to come to RAP for any kind of approval. So it's very defined on what needs to be done with that, so.
We tried to limit it as much as possible, and at least, again, this is the draft, and you guys can move the sliders however you'd like to move them, essentially to determine what comes to RAP and what doesn't come to RAP and what is inherently within the authority of the alderperson and what requires an extra level of oversight. But we tried to make sure that things like like facade programs or some of the things that in the past would come to City Council for approval, grant programs, things like that, were the types of things that would either be baked into the ordinance or require RAP approval.
So for instance, using Alderman Masiacos, as this sits right here, he would just need RAP approval, or would he have to continue to COW and City Council?
We would look at that as a grant for neighborhood improvements. Now, right now, that's drafted as a non-capital expenditure because it's not necessarily a public improvement for the city, but again, that would be something that would come to RAP because that's something that has always come to RAP and previously to City Council before RAP.
And that would continue to do so as this,
It would continue to come to RAP
because of this non-capital, or?
because of the way the ordinance is drafted. Now, right now, it's in a non-capital
Yeah.
bucket, but depending on how that gets moved around.
And then, for instance, and I'm all over the place and I apologize, but for Alderman Buggs, for like his scholarship fund, let's say, so in a perfect world, he could start the Ninth Ward Alderman, or, the Ninth Ward Scholarship Fund, and it'd be like its own entity, and then he can have ward funds allocated, if it's a 501c, meets all that criteria.
So long as there was at least an arm's length between the alderperson and the fund. So if it were somebody who was a number of constituents within Ward 9 that the alderman was not part of that governing board, came together, even at the alderman's instance, came together, formed this entity, they did the fundraising, the alderman contributes to it, and that group makes a blind selection process, that would be perfectly fine.
And then as this ordinance sets right now, would he be able to still continue to do what you've currently done now and in the past, or would that somehow be prohibited by this, as far as?
Without knowing all the mechanics of the alderman's scholarship program, it's difficult to say. Now, my understanding is the way the alderman has operated in the past is that he has raised money, others have contributed to a fund that's maintained by the city, and then there is a blind award based on that. there may need to be some tweaking with it a little bit, or either with the program or with the wording in the ordinance, but that does present this type of the type of separation we'd be looking at. Something that it's not Alderman A saying, person B, you're getting this amount of scholarship and it's entirely a ward fund.
And then, last question for me. So we, as a group here, we can decide whether, if we want to keep the capital versus non-capital. We can, that's, again, came from the office committee. We can say it's 75,000, and we can define, take that non-capital and capital out and say we have buckets like ward improvements, ward communication, ward events, or something like that?
You would make a recommendation to the city council as part of your report on whatever ordinance you produce that talks about the types of buckets that you would like the city council to fill as part of the budgeting process. This ordinance then would be vetted by the COW and then eventually go to city council, and if it's approved, then the next step would be how much, as part of the budgeting, goes into what fund.
So, and this is the last thing I'm going to say about this, is I feel that, that we're put in this position to make decisions for our ward, or in my case, for the entire city. And I think we got to keep that as much to ourselves. You know what I mean? Is our, I don't want to say power, but our authority, I guess, to be able to govern and manage our ward as we see fit, like 8th Ward versus 2nd Ward, and, you know, there's different needs and different things there too. So I don't necessarily want to tie anybody's hands, but there has to be, in my opinion, has to be guidelines. And ultimately, you know, we are held responsible by our decisions, you know, every 4 years. So if there's something that we're doing wrong, people can let us know by voting us out, essentially, in my
Well,
opinion. So,
and staff likes to respectfully remind the alderpersons that we're not the boss of you.
right.
So it puts us in a very awkward position where we have to take a look at these and say no. And when we're saying no, and there isn't the black letter law to back that up, it puts us all in a very difficult situation, and, you know, it becomes very hard. And again, if mom says no but dad says yes, depending on who gets asked, it could be a potential issue. So we want to make sure that there's as much clarity as possible, and that you know what to expect and what you expect from us.
I would agree, so. Any questions, comments, anybody else? Alderman Yamas?
Thank you. Let me pull up my notes real quick here on the attachment. So with the attached proposed ordinance that's here in our iPads, I saw something on page 5, lines 20 to 21. It's paragraph 4, subparagraph 3, that talks about the restrictions on, or the prohibition on scholarships. But there is the exception for government or a nonprofit organization or a school district that awards scholarships which are available exclusively to all city residents. That last, like, we'll say requirement that the awards, or that the scholarships be awarded to exclusively to city residents, is that only for school districts or also for the nonprofits and governments?
I can clarify that the intent was that it is a city resident that would receive whatever benefit from that contribution.
So whether that's, we're contributing towards a nonprofit or school district?
Exactly. So if you wanted to contribute to somebody who was, to a scholarship that, it was a high school that didn't only draw Aurora residents, for example, one of the parochial schools might have a scholarship program. If you wanted to contribute to that, there would have to be a stipulation that this particular scholarship is only a Aurora resident would be entitled to it.
Thank you for that clarification. And a related question here too, I guess, kind of going back to the intent on the scholarship restriction, is it more so that we don't want one alderman controlling which specific private party is going to receive these scholarships, and that's why we're instead going to go through a nonprofit? Because my first thought is, there's an easy loophole here. I'll start a nonprofit, and I'll give the donations from my award funds to the nonprofit, and then my nonprofit can then go ahead and disperse these to students.
That loophole, I believe, is closed a little bit later in the ordinance in terms of prohibited expenditures, because, or actually, let me see where that is.
To the family members?
Yeah, well, not only to a family member, but I believe there is a prohibition about, let's see where that is.
For the entities?
And we can refine that a little bit, but the intent would be essentially the same way as, it would effectively almost be a prohibited interest, even though it's not, even if it's not called out there. The argument, I think, would be that it's a prohibited interest in a contract, that if the alderman is the beneficiary, if an entity that the alderman controls essentially, and as a member of, receives that benefit directly, that would likely be a prohibited interest in that contract. Essentially, you pay X in exchange for issuing a scholarship. You may have an interest in that particular contract, and for that reason, it would be prohibited and void as a matter of law.
I'm sorry, you said if you have a financial interest or a controlling
Exactly.
interest?
So if there was any sort of financial interest in that contract, or if you're basically engaging a nonprofit to perform a government function. So if that nonprofit you're involved in the leadership or organization or control over receives that could be arguably a prohibited interest in contract.
So would that apply then if I'm just one board member, let's say on an established nonprofit that's been operating in Aurora for years, would I, as an alderman, be able to request that ward funds go to that nonprofit for scholarship purposes if I'm on that board?
You ought not. You ought to be very careful about the expenditure of ward funds to a nonprofit on which you serve as a member of the board.
Would we be able to include or specify that here in the ordinance?
Easily.
Just for clarification?
Easily. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a question to you.
Question of me, sir?
Yes, so we talked a lot about the beginning of this, and there's still a lot more to talk about. Obviously, we can't keep going on this because we got another meeting coming up. Where do we go next? I mean, we didn't even touch on the middle and the end of this ordinance. So what do you want us to do? How do you want us to engage with you to say, these are the things that I want to see done or changed or important to my ward to be a part of this? How would you like us to proceed?
My suggestion, and I'll follow legal thing, is I've tried the individual conversations, and I think that gets to be too much. I'm speaking with you, and I'm speaking over here, so I would prefer to, reconvene, and again in 2 weeks, and continue the discussion, so.
What my recommendation might be is to look at this and, consistent with the Open Meetings Act, deliberate in small, non-quorum creating groups and majority quorum creating groups, and come back at the next meeting and report back and give direction to the law department as to what sort of changes you want to see made. Again, be cognizant of the Open Meetings Act and your obligation to engage transparently. But, if two aldermen wanted to discuss this, that would certainly be appropriate. And come back and, as a committee, deliberate and provide direction as far as what changes and revisions should be made to this ordinance. I will take them back, and over the course of the following 2 weeks, incorporate them into the document, and then at the second RAP committee in November, hopefully have something that the committee would be ready to report favorably on to the city council for approval, or
I don't think it's
COW.
going to happen that quick.
Well,
But we can hope.
it doesn't hurt to be optimistic, but again, you're looking at something that is 25 years in the making, or 25 years potentially overdue. So if it takes a little bit of time to do it and make sure that it's right, take a little bit of time to do it and make sure it's right.
I
Agreed.
would agree with that, so.
Agreed.
I just want to say one more thing.
Yeah, sure, Alderman Franco.
So I think today we made a dent in the philosophical aspect.
Correct.
That's very important, because if we can't get together on the philosophical aspect, then we can't do the concrete minutia that we're looking to do. So I think today was very good with that. The explanations were wonderful. I think I got a little bit more of a feel philosophically, so I think once we get on that page, I think we're close. Then the nuts and bolts of this, I think, are going to fall into place, so I think we made a pretty good start
I would
today.
agree. I would agree with that, so. Alderman B?
Thank you, Chairman. I do have a lot of questions, but in a sense of time, we have to go to next meeting, so maybe I'll touch base with you one-on-one. But I do want to mention for sure that we have to keep in mind inflation. 2009 is when this was appropriated, and within last 2 years, I've seen a lot of price differences in the things. Just, for example, printing. When I started, it was around 8,000, and now it's at least over 10,000 for my ward. So I would like to continue with my newsletter and things that I like to do. Streetlight was 6,000 something, and now it's about 8,200. So inflation definitely needs to be accounted here. And one place where I saw where 3,000 was mentioned for any of the individuals who are invited for different programs or several other things. Is it the same way for all the departments in the city, or it's just for like coming to RAP for approval for 3,000 if you're
Well,
inviting a speaker?
Again, that would depend on who's inviting the speaker and with what level of authority that they're coming from. But what I will tell you again with the inflation is the reason that there are no numbers other than that cap in the ordinance is because the budget is an annual process, and the budget is something that is determined every year, and that's where it's appropriate to talk about whether or not there should be more money available to do a newsletter versus not. So it wouldn't be appropriate to include in here because this is essentially an ordinance of a general and permanent nature, whereas the budget is something that would change every year, and that's the point, that's the place to put the zeros.
Okay, and I might need more clarification on that, so maybe I can talk offline. So same for this $3,000 that we were saying, like if you're inviting an individual for a program, do other departments also need to come to RAP for permission?
Again, it would depend on who's asking and what the program is.
Okay, so, and if, right now, chair is the person who is the decider whether
No.
approval? That's what
It's
this
no.
document say?
What happens is, the chair is involved only as to the deadlines. So if there are deadlines in the ordinance as to when these requests have to go in, because there is administrative things that have to happen, mechanically, things have to be entered into the agenda system, or checks have to be processed. So it can't be a wait to the last minute. And for that reason, the chair is essentially the safety valve to say, okay, this is 60 days, you're asking at day 51, we can still make it work, let's put it in the agenda, as opposed to saying it's 60 days, you're out of luck. So it's allowing for a little bit of a safety valve there.
It's not clear in that document.
Yeah.
I agree, that's why I
And
said there's got to be
if-
some clarity in this.
If chair and vice chair are participating and they need approval, who is the approving, or
Well,
who's the body?
if the chair is conflicted, then the vice chair would say, okay, put it on the agenda, or go ahead and process the check.
If they're working together on something and
There,
some project?
I think that is a exception that swallows the rule. I don't know that that is something that would, it's an individual ward, and again, it's a situation where the aldermen have, for lack of a better way of putting it, have blown the deadline that all the other aldermen set for them to do it. So this is an ordinance, and this is effectively a variance. So if the alderman didn't comply with the deadlines, and there's not a particular out for it, then that's effectively the rule.
Just one more. I think that's the last page. Any funds appropriated or budgeted for the use of ward alderperson for capital improvements purposes prior to 2023, which remain unspent, shall remain available for the use of the respective ward alderperson in the manner provided for the use of capital funds in this section until December 31st, 2025.
Yes.
So they have to spend everything, otherwise?
They have to spend it, or they have to encumber it and say, this is what it's specifically designed for. And you can change your mind, but you at least have to say, it's going to be for Project X, and as opposed to, I want to keep this here for a rainy day.
Okay, we can
You can.
make plans
You can.
and save more money.
And this is encouraging you to make plans that require years forethought, because, again, when there is a budgeting, it's money that's intended to be spent within that budget year. And that's
this is-
effectively a limitation of government.
This is an example that we didn't even get through this document, because we didn't even get to that part of the document. So we definitely have to have conversation about that. Okay. Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, you're welcome. So, any other questions, comments, or, all right, so then we'll move this forward,
No, just-
to the next time and
You just you keep it here, and
enjoy a conversation.
we'll move it when you're ready.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks, everybody. That was a great conversation, so. Let's see here. So next item on the agenda is 23-0818, an ordinance amending Chapter 2, Section 2-491, Music, Events, and Entertainment Commission.
This is an easy one. Good afternoon, Alex Voigt with the Mayor's Office. This amendment is requesting to increase the size of the new Music, Events, and Entertainment Commission from 9 members to 11 members.
Questions, comments? Alderman Franco?
So, what is the criteria to get on this? Because I saw at least one person, I'm sorry, I got the wrong page here, that didn't have really any musical
Oh,
background.
the appointments we can go through in the separate
Okay,
appointment
we'll go, yeah,
items, if
that-
that's
yeah, this
okay.
is
Yeah,
just
this
some-
is just an ordinance amendment.
Moving over from 9 to 11, you said?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, increasing from 9 to 11.
Second, yeah. Any other questions, comments? Motion by Alderman Smith, second by Alderman Franco. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Yeah. For the next 1, 2, 3, 4 items, I'm going to recuse myself, turn everything over to Vice Chair Yamas, so he can handle this. I'm going to step out of the room. Do I need to read the item numbers, or does it matter? Yeah, so,
I think you read them and then you recuse yourself?
oh, okay. Oh, read all 4?
Or, no, just ask legal to.
We can discuss all of them together, but just read all the titles or,
Okay, so just read them all now, and then?
yeah, and then.
Perfect. Okay, so first one is 23-0800, an ordinance amending Chapter 8, Division 8, 9-1 pertaining to amusement devices generally. Next item is 23-0801, an ordinance amending Chapter 8, Article 8-9, Division 8-9-5 pertaining to video gaming. 23-0803, an ordinance amending Chapter 29, Article 29-9, Division 29-9-2 pertaining to gambling. Last but not least, 23-0806, an ordinance amending Chapter 8, Division 8-9-6 pertaining to video gaming. So, thank you.
Thank you. Should we state that Alderman Warman has left the room?
Correct.
All right, thank you, Rep Committee. Alex Voigt here, and with me, I have Dave Tellner, the city's Business Compliance Officer, and this item was also done in conjunction with the City Clerk's Office and the Law Department. What we have before you today are 4 separate items that all pertain to the same topic, and that is they are amusement devices that have been operating in the city in a manner very, very similar to the video gaming terminals, which are very closely regulated not only at the state level, but at the city as well. A few years ago, the city went to great lengths to modify our video gaming terminal ordinance. We put in very specific requirements and regulations in terms of where they may operate, the manner in which, the number, et cetera. And then through the work of Mr. Tellner, the business compliance officer, we discovered that we had these amusement devices that were operating. So we've provided a few pictures of the locations where these devices are. We have approximately 15 locations where we've identified these machines, none of which would qualify for a video gaming license at the state or local level. So these are just some of the 15 locations that we have. So what I'd like to do is just do a brief overview of the proposed amendments for each section. The first is to update the definition of video gaming terminal or gambling device, and then add the video gaming terminal or gambling device is prohibited. And I'm sorry, this is to the amusement section of the ordinance. So amusement devices would be, what are some examples? Jukeboxes, those sorts of things. But certainly these machines don't fall under that definition. But right now there is an area in the code where, because it's not expressly identified or prohibited, we've been unable to regulate them to this point. The next section is the video gaming, and it updates the definition to mirror that we are proposing to put in the amusement section. We've tightened up the language around licensing the video gaming terminals, updated the application submissions location to revenue and collections. That is who receives the application for video gaming terminals. The city clerk's office does work in partnership, but revenue and collections is the responsible division. And then, consistent with our other processes, removes the application fee from the ordinance to be set by resolution. And that's something we've been doing any section of the code as we take it through piece by piece. The next section is, it clarifies the penalty section and adds compliance officer to the compliance monitored by the city. The business compliance officer was added to the budget 2 years ago, within the past couple of years. So we added this because that is part of Dave's role, is to visit businesses to determine if they're in compliance with food and beverage taxes and other city rules and regulations. And then lastly, Chapter 29, again, adding the definition consistent with the amusement and gaming, and then updating the language in the gambling place section. So that, with that, I can take questions, and we do have Dave here if you have specific questions.
I do have a question. How did we find out about these places? Is this something that we've known about for a while? Is it just kind of the numbers have kind of grown?
I will start a little bit of history before Mr. Tellner started.
Okay.
2020, when COVID shut down the casino and everything, the police department started seeing that all these machines were popping up in gas stations. Then we realized there were some other issues, and then asked for that additional position, and he has really taken it to the next level, showing what has been happening with this gray area.
So how did you find out?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm Dave Tellner, Business Compliance Officer. Just a brief, before I took this position, I retired from the police department after 20-some years. So before I retired, I saw a couple of these places popping up, and then it kind of piqued my interest because it seemed like it was growing a little bit, little by little. Then I came into this position, and when I started doing checks for liquor license stuff, I noticed that there was a lot more than I knew about, or I mean, it kind of surprised me. So as I went along, I just started taking pictures and documenting it, and that's how we came up with the number that Ms. Boyd just showed you so far.
Interesting.
So for this loophole that you just discussed and was referenced here in the memo, what specifically was it? I'm not understanding why these are any different than just a normal gaming machine.
These amusement machines have a free play on it, and you can also win like a pair of sunglasses, but then it goes beyond that you, just like when you go over to the casino, you print out a little tag. Some of them in a laundromat have a kiosk that will literally pay you out money.
Ooh.
So it's different than just video gaming that you're doing for fun. There's actual payouts.
Underground video games.
So now are the changes that we're looking to make here are going to completely prohibit those by just specifying that any payout, right, anything that could be taxable income now makes it a video gaming machine? So there could still be like a free version, or if you're at the laundromat while you're you're washing your clothes, you could go and play in a free machine.
I don't
So
know.
in that case, it would really just be amusement, no different than playing a video game.
I don't know if those machines have the capability to have it that way, or that they would be maintained in the laundromat with just.
I mean, maybe logically, the property owner wouldn't want them because it's not making them any money, but if they're completely free, then they wouldn't fall under this ordinance, right?
That is correct. The purpose of, and part of this, you bring up a good point, Alderman, and that is the fact that staff has to be able to prove that they are, in fact, that there is a cash prize associated with it. So we can't just go and see a machine and say you can't have that. There has to be some sort of proof that there is some exchange of money happening that puts it into the video gaming category. So technically, that is correct. I don't know if in Mr. Tellner's experience, he's seen any that have not had payouts. But technically, if it is an amusement device, then it would be allowed.
So for the businesses that were identified, if we pass this ordinance, we just send them a letter and then follow up, and maybe similar to what APD would do and have underage kids try to buy tobacco, would we do the same thing and send someone in to gamble and see if there are any prizes?
Correct. And the idea was to give them until the end of this year to voluntarily remove the terminals. But at that point, when they are outright prohibited and we are able to take action on them, we would treat them as any other oversight that we would have, any license or anything along those lines.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Alderman Franco?
So I just want to piggyback on what you mentioned. I'm looking at the definition of gambling device, and it goes through that, but it says gambling device does not include a slot machine operated mechanical device, play for amusement, blah, 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 blah. So what you're talking about. So I think it's in there, what a gambling device is and what it's not, and what it's not is not illegal. So I think that's already been, just because of definition, I think it's already been addressed. Page 1 of the.
Page 1 of
That would
the
be
video
under-
gaming terminal?
That would be
Gambling device?
0803.
I'm looking at 8.
Yeah, and
Section
then if you go to
890.
Exhibit A, it says gambling device, what it means, and then it says device, what it does not include. So I think that's kind of what you're talking about. So I think we're off the hook with that based on just definitions.
Okay, thank you. I'll look at that right now. Alderman Bug?
Yeah. Oh, for clarification, you did say a couple sentences ago, cash prizes. This is any prize of value, I believe. This is kind of why we're here. Any prize of value, correct?
I'll defer to legal on that one.
I mean, this is, I remember back in COVID and working with Mr. Cook, and the machines you would get a little ticket for a prize, and you would go up to the person working at the store or gas station, whatever, give them the voucher, and you would get whatever prize. And that was kind of the transition from, cash. It wasn't cash, but you got something. So that is covered, correct? I mean, that's, I think, part of our problem.
And I'm looking at the definition on Legislature item 23-0801 on the devices, and it is saying that the person may receive element of chance which a person may receive a gift, reward, or other item or service of value. So that would include what you're stating.
Okay.
Just, another thought came to mind now. Would this not include video games, like an arcade? If you're getting tickets to then go, like Chuck E. Cheese, to go and cash in for a remote control car, is that now prohibited? Because there are also, there's some that are games of skill, others that are games of chance.
Get tickets, you get to go get something for free.
We
Well,
can,
you paid, so that's,
Yeah, we paid for the tickets.
I don't see how that wouldn't fall under this.
and let us, depending on what you do today, that is something we can clarify before committee of the whole to make sure that is not.
Because those are examples of amusement devices that are licensed under the amusement section, but again, you bring up a good point, so we can look to clarify that, because that's certainly not what we're looking to do. It's just the video gaming, the terminals that are operating similar to a video gaming terminal that we were looking to address.
But I don't see how we could move forward without this also affecting what I'll call arcade games. And I personally don't feel comfortable moving forward to COW without us having to find that. That's not like a kind of a last minute add-on.
Could we move it to Cal with the amendment that it does not include that? If they find out it does, we bring it back here, but assuming it's not going to, because that's not the intent. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out a way to go forward, saying that we do not accept that it would include arcade games. They prove us wrong, we bring it back,
But to me, that would lead to a discussion on what an arcade game is versus what these are. Because if I'm there to win a cash prize or a pair of sunglasses, it's not much different than if I go over to an arcade. Even, downtown Aurora here, if I go to the Yeti place and do the same thing, if I'm playing pinball, it's a game of skill, but others are games of chance.
We still it's on Legislature item 23-0800. The definitions, the amusement device is still in there with regards to the games of skill of chance, billard, I don't know, pigeonhole, some of these other specific games. Excludes video gaming terminals, which we then define. So are you still in that gray area that?
So the arcades are already accounted for under an ordinance, that they're licensed, and we're saying the license for the arcades does not include video gaming. But then these specific terminals right now, we're going to define as video gaming? Then, with our normal slots or slot games?
The updated definition would take those machines that we're finding in the gas stations, grocery stores. I don't know if the amusement device, I don't know if that's maybe what could be clarified more to include, because it does have pinball, electric darts, prize crane, and other like machines. If we maybe go into more detail on the amusement device to exclude the Chuck E. Cheese, like bowling games, whack-a-mole, that type of game.
And arcades are expressly defined as well, arcades, pool rooms, and then the amusement device. So again, this was intended to be separate, but if the committee wants to hold it here and have us further refine it, or at COW, either is fine.
I don't think that we necessarily need to hold it. I just am just trying to see the big picture here, because this is the way I'm looking at things. We have the video gaming terminals, like a slot, I'll call it. We have, and then that's one end. The other end are arcade games at Chuck E. Cheese, and now these video terminals that are kind of somewhere in the middle, just kind of hanging in limbo. So we're excluding them with our arcades and saying they are not defined as an arcade. And then the other end, we're also saying they are not defined as a video gaming machine or terminal. So then they're just not allowed because they aren't provided for under the definitions of either those two, or am I just looking at that wrong?
I think it kind of snuck in as a amusement device, which was the, not the arcade games per se, but somewhere in that realm, and as time has gone on, I'm not sure if somebody looking at a video gaming terminal and these amusement machines in the gas stations can really tell the difference between a video gaming terminal and what is that they are defining as an amusement machine. But if you compare it to something at Chuck E. Cheese, which would be an amusement device, there is clearly a difference.
And if that's something that you want us to more clearly articulate in the presentation for COW to clearly delineate the differences, that's something that we could do also, to make sure that it's appropriately, that we're putting things in the category in which they're intended.
I think that's a good idea.
I do
too. Okay.
Just so that we can, because if I'm kind of confused by this, I'm sure there might be others that are just as confused, and I want to make sure that we don't end up accidentally banning video games in Aurora.
Sure.
For children.
If I can jump
And
in.
adults.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alderman Bug.
I think, you made a great point. So, at the far end, I don't think Yeti, they're definitely not, because you get no quote-unquote prize or thing. We don't have a Chuck E. Cheese, right? But
That's in Naperville now.
yeah, but no, I mean, your point is great, because that's exactly what some of the round one machines do. No, I don't think there are any are the video ones, but, you know, the skee ball and different things, you get tickets and there's a room and you go get a prize. That's kind of the whole thing behind those, you know, bonus on those machines. So, yeah, we need to delineate.
Sure.
You know, round one's a great business. We don't want to, you know, carve them accidentally into this situation in this area. So, yeah, we need to know.
Clean it up.
Yeah.
Sure, we can do that. That's no problem.
Any other questions? So are you guys comfortable then with us setting it for Cow with the understanding that we will have an updated presentation with that information so we can distinguish between the two and possibly some proposed language if we need to?
I would say some proposed language in there to delineate between the two.
All right, so I see, how would we do this since we have the multiple agenda items?
You have to read them one at a time. and-
Take a vote on each one?
Yes.
All right, I don't have a script for this, let me kind of, go ahead.
Do you want to move forward without our recommendation, which
So-
is a possibility and we've done
If I could,
in the past?
if I could state it, I believe it will really only be the 23-0800 because that's the one specifically regarding amusements, and that's the one that we want to make sure is clearly delineated. The other two are video gaming, and then the other is offenses miscellaneous. So if you're comfortable with those three, potentially the 0800 with no recommendation, that would be the only one that needs the picture painted more clearly.
I think that makes sense. If we can do it that way. So for the very first one, the 23-0800, since if that one, if we're moving forward without a recommendation, then we're not taking a vote on it, do I have to say anything on the record? Ask our attorney here.
Probably need to make a motion, we move forward without recommendation.
Correct.
The second.
And then, okay, then we still do it.
So,
All right.
so I've done that.
So do I have a motion to move line item 23-0800 to committee of the whole without recommendation?
So move.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. No vote on this? Is that correct? Or we still vote on
We
without
have
recommendation?
to vote on it.
If we
So-
made a motion, we got to vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? All right, the motion passes 4-0. Thank you for bearing with me today. After 4 years, I finally get to have the mic. So for the next item, 23-0801, an ordinance amending Chapter 8, Articles 8, 9, Division 8-9-5 pertaining to video gaming. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Motion from Alderman Franco, second from Alderwoman Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. 4-0. The next item, 23-0803, an ordinance amending Chapter 29, Article 29-4, Division 29-4-2 pertaining to gambling. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion, Alderman Franco. I'll give Alderman Bug the second on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Was that 803?
One more.
I have one more. 23-0806, an ordinance amending Chapter 8, Division 8-4-6 pertaining to video gaming.
Second.
Motion by Alderwoman Smith, second by Alderman Franco. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Should we let Alderman Warman back in?
And Alderman Smith has to use those.
Did I call you Alderman instead of Alderwoman?
I think it's okay.
I'm sorry.
I'll just call you Alderwoman next time.
I'm not offended by
I
it.
know
You
you won't.
can call me Alder X.
At what point did we lose control?
House didn't burn down.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair Yamas. On to the next item here, 23-0815, a resolution approving the appointment of Michael Zapata to the Aurora Veterans Advisory Board.
Yes, this item represents a new candidate. He is a resident of the 6th Ward, also a retired police officer who is a former Marine.
So moved.
Questions, comments from everybody? A motion by Alderman Yamas. I didn't hear the second.
Second.
Second by Alderman Bug. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ordinance passed 4-0. Next item on the agenda, 23-0817, resolution appointing 3 inaugural members, Daryl Silberman, Tiffany Hall, and Alvin Watkins, for a 3-year term to the Music, Events, and Entertainment Commission.
Yes, so before you today, over the next 3 items, are the proposed inaugural 11 members to the new Music, Events, and Entertainment Commission. We had 51 applicants for this commission, and after reviewing the applications, we interviewed 22 individuals, and the 9 here before you today represent those that we'd like to move forward. So the reason they're broken into 3 items is when we start a new commission, we separate everyone by term. That is done through a very technical lottery drawing in the mayor's office. So the first item, Daryl Silberman is a Ward 8 resident. She is a middle school orchestra teacher and also works with the Youth Symphony of DuPage. She's a very accomplished musician. Tiffany Hall is from the 2nd Ward. She is an artist. She is a singer in a local cover band, and she also has experience with Broadway in Chicago. And then Alvin, whose last name is escaping me, he is a 9th Ward resident. He has his music management degree, and he has a 9-to-5 job, but is also a touring musician with the band Public Announcement. So that's the first 3 candidates.
So moved.
I do have a question on Mr. Watkins.
Sure.
Alvin Watkins. What kind of band is that?
It's an R&B group that was very popular in the 90s, I believe.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
They're very well known in the R&B world.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? A motion by Alderman Smith, second by Alderman Franco. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Next item, 23-0837, a resolution, 23-0835, I apologize for that. A resolution appointing 4 inaugural members, Dee Dee Foley, Michael Sumners, Alex Benitez, and Brandon Smith for a 2-year term to the Music, Events, and Entertainment Commission.
So moved.
Second.
Dee Dee Foley is a non-resident, but she is the Student Services Manager for Waubonsee Community College at the downtown campus. She is also an on-air radio personality on the weekends, so she has a good base of experience in the entertainment arena. Michael lives on the 4th Ward, the West Side 4th Ward, and he previously worked with the Rosie O'Donnell Show. He worked with Letterman and also has experience with the New York University various departments there, and also has consulted and worked on a number of high-profile festivals, events, and those sorts of things. And then lastly, Alex is also a non-resident, but he owns We Are Music Studios, which is in downtown Aurora, right down the street on Downer, and he is a DJ. And then Braden, who is an East Side Ward 4 resident, of course, is part owner of French 75 and is a very, very accomplished jazz musician.
Any other questions, comments? Motion by Alderman Smith, second by Alderman Bug. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Next item, 23-0837, a resolution appointing 4 inaugural members, John Sargent, Nina Arm Rosa, William Small Jr., and Aaron Lechuga, for a 1-year term to the Music, Events, and Entertainment Commission.
Second.
John Sargent is a Ward 5 resident. He works with the Fox Valley Folklore Society, who does a sing-around at the Roundhouse weekly. They're a very well-established group. We also have, he also participates with Ukulele Fest. Nina she's a non-resident, but she is a creative director. She does a number of events in downtown Aurora, and she also hosts a podcast with the owner of Liquid House. William Small is a Ward 8 resident, and he owns Jazz Perspectives, a talent management agency. And then Aaron Lechuga is another East Side Ward 4 resident. He has his degree in arts management. He is a musician. He does musical events. He works with an event company, and he's also a music teacher. And that closes out the recommendations for the Music Events and Entertainment Commission.
Any questions, comments? Motion by Alderman Smith, second by Alderman Franco. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Resolution passes 5-0. Final item, 23-0843, an ordinance amending Chapter 27, Section 27-168, stopping, standing, or parking prohibited.
Yes, Alex Voigt again. This item represents a minor amendment to, let me back up, I'm sorry. There's an interdisciplinary group of city departments and divisions who are working on ideas as to how to address the parking problem when we have 2 inches of snow or more. So one of the ideas that we came up with was to advertise mechanisms that exist in the code currently for when we have 2 inches of snow or more, to do a public information campaign and let people know where they can park. Rather than just saying, don't park on the street, we'd like to give them some ideas and see if we can move the needle on that. We have representatives of Property Standards here with us today who came up with the idea to highlight, again, sections in the code that explain where individuals are able to park when there is 2 inches of snow or more. But in conversations with staff, it was pointed out that the current parkway provision that exists comes with the possibility of damaging city infrastructure. That's where a lot of the B boxes are located. So we would like to remove that from the code, so we don't have any issues with that. So I do have Josh and Ruthie here if there are any questions on this one. And again, this is, I believe, the only ordinance amendment we'll be bringing forward. We are proposing to change the snow ticket fee price, which will be coming up at Finance, and then there will be a public information campaign and communication with the individual aldermen as well. So this is part of a larger effort that we are undertaking.
Any questions, comments?
Yeah.
Alderman Bug?
I'm just going to assume a tree bank is the same thing as a parkway? Just maybe a different part of town, calls it something different, I don't know.
Maybe archaic language,
Okay.
but that was my assumption as well.
Okay, you learn something new every day.
There you go.
A lot of old language in the code here.
Okay,
Second.
Did we answer it? Yeah. Tree banks?
Yeah.
Oh, so you're good?
yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I do have a
Yeah,
quick
sure.
question. I mean, this isn't
Alderman
what we're
Jones.
addressing today, but it's within the same ordinance. The requirement that you cannot, or that there needs to be at least 5 feet between your vehicle and the driveway entrance in front of a house. Where do we come up with that? Because I've seen, like, especially in a lot of parts of the older east side of Aurora, where the curb in front of someone's house just doesn't have enough distance for the person parking there to meet this requirement of the 5 feet on either side.
So, hi, Josh from Property Standards. So typically, obviously, you're talking about the curb cut, right? Off the approach, and we would do the 5 feet. At times, there are properties that do have a long angled curb cut, but when we would do a 5-foot rule, would be going directly parallel with the driveway to the street. Well, we wouldn't go right at the angle, because there are curb cuts that will extend more than 5 feet.
Especially the size of some of these trucks and cars.
Yes, yes. So typically, yes, we would go down parallel with the driveway and then mark it, and then from right there, we'll go 5 feet back, because it's still giving you enough room to be able to safely turn out of there.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just throw in, this came from good old government operations when I was on that committee many years ago. Basically, we had people parking in front of the mailboxes. Your mailbox is right next to your driveway. And so we just said 5 feet. If you're back 5 feet, you won't be in front of the mailbox post. And that was kind of where that came from. Between Alderwoman Hart Burns and the committee, that's kind of where it came from.
Is the ordinance 5 feet from the mailbox or 5 feet from the?
No, from the drive, because the mailbox is right, normally like a foot or two from the driveway. So that's kind of the beginning of that, way back when.
Any other question and comments regarding this? Motion by, was it Alderman Smith? Second by Alderman Franco. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Second.
No need for a closed second. Motion to adjourn by Alderman Smith, second by Alderman Doug. All in favor? All opposed?